Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cloud Native Now podcast. I am Sharon Florentine. I am here again with Mike Vizard. And this week, we are going to kick things off and with a sad little eulogy of sorts for Weaveworks. Earlier this week, Alexis Richardson, in a LinkedIn post, announced that the company was shutting its doors permanently. And as many of us know, Weaveworks was one of the foundations of the GitOps methodology movement in the cloud native space. They were also the creators of the Flux project. But thoughts on Weaveworks' demise? Mike?
Well, I think Flux lives on because it's an open source project, and I think the CNCF folks are involved in that. But I think this is one of many of these unfortunate circumstances that we're about to see because, well, the venture capital community is pulling back funding for startups like Weaveworks, and the issue is interest rates are high, and so they can't really return a value proposition to their investors that beats the current interest rate. So a lot of money that they were counting on is being held up, and they're not inclined to invest further until they see some other activities in the financial sector change. And I think Weaveworks was probably looking around for somebody to acquire it, and those talks are difficult. We've seen some of the valuations of companies in this space are, shall we say, shallow.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't much of a play for him either. And frankly, I think they just ran out of runway in terms of, or not enough time and didn't get enough altitude. And by that, I mean, the fundamental premise here with GitOps is that I'm going to manage the infrastructure as code in the same Git repository that I'm going to manage the rest of my application code. Well, do I need a separate platform to do that, or can I do that in my existing Git repositories? The answer is yes, I can do GitOps in my existing stuff. So a lot of folks were like, yeah, it's a good idea, but is it a movement? I'm not entirely sure. It seems more like it's a feature. And they were also making a case for separating continuous integration and CD. Now, on paper, that's probably a good idea, but most people, let's be honest, they kind of stink at CD in the first place. So, we get the continuous integration side of things, but we still haven't wrapped our arms around continuous delivery, and it really only works when there's a consistent set of APIs for something like Kubernetes to run it on. Well, if I don't have enough Kubernetes clusters out there, I don't have enough people who are really going to do CD anyway. So I think the world is going to go to this more loosely coupled CI/CD approach. But as that old cowboy wisdom says, never mistake a clear view for a short distance, and they just ran out of time.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. So, like you said, Flux lives on. It's now a graduated project with the CNCF. I mean, is that really, that's going to be the legacy, you think?
Yeah, I think people will contribute to it. I'm not sure that, will it have enough momentum to hold up? There's a lot of things that people can contribute to, and they will naturally drift, shall we say, to other things maybe. So it remains to be seen. But if you, are using the Weaveworks platform and you have Flux, you're not, abandoned because Weaveworks isn't around. So you can decide to continue to use that, and you have to rip and replace everything overnight. But you might be looking for somebody else for a little support from time to time. But these are the challenges we live in with all open source projects.
Indeed. Well, rest in peace, Weaveworks. Thank you for your contributions. And moving on, though, to some other bad news, I guess we could say, this week.
I guess it's not so much bad news, but we were talking about security last episode. And since then, we've seen a couple of interesting attacks. One is involved, I forgot what it's called again, but
the Commando Cat.
Commando Cat, that's it.
Start with that one.
Yeah, now Commando Cat, I don't think it's a huge attack vector, but it's another example where somebody created a fake repository and developers wound up downloading some code that was infected, and then somebody could jailbreak out of their container and into the host environment, move laterally, and chaos ensues. I think it's just something developers need to be aware of. There's a tendency just to kind of fat finger your way into a repository, and the next thing you know is, hey, I think I got all this stuff, I'm good to go, and suddenly your entire project is compromised. So it's just a word to the wise. I know Sneak, yeah, and then Sneak had some stuff where it was more theoretical, but they were just showing how a couple of combinations of attacks could lead to almost the same effect. It's essentially another jailbreak kind of mechanism. That requires an update to your Docker tools to mitigate. And so the issue now with a lot of folks is like, hey, now all the bad guys know how to do this. And if I didn't update my tool, then yeah, suddenly I could be a victim here. But hopefully people are staying current, because if you want to be secure, you got to stay current. That's how the world is.
Right. And this is another, especially with the Commando Cat vulnerability that we were talking about last week, that involves initially, at least, cryptojacking that a lot of people still perceive as a nuisance crime. That, well, what's really the harm? They're not, doing anything super, super damaging. But again, like you said, the point is that it can escalate, and, the container escape can lead to much more detrimental effects down the line. So
now there's good news in this part of the world. We have, the guys at KSOC are putting together something that amounts to a digital fingerprint for container images, which is kind of be key, because if the fingerprint is altered in any way, well, then it means somebody went into your image and tinkered with it or tampered with it in a way that you probably are not going to like. And so, ultimately, it's still early days, but we could have a situation where we have monitoring tools and SOCs and everything could be looking for these fingerprints. And if any changes to the images, there'll be an alert and we can respond accordingly and maybe replace those images instantly, or maybe we'll have some fancy AI thing that will go after the images to see where they all are, because there's so many of them. But they envision a world where there's a repository full of fingerprints that they provide for open source container images, and companies that build their own images will be able to license a commercial version and apply fingerprints to those container images. So I would just say, hey, there's hope.
Yep, absolutely. So on that front, when I was looking at that article, is that kind of analogous to like a code signing technology?
Yeah.
The fingerprinting?
It's similar in concept, absolutely. I don't think it requires developers to do much anything other than the fact that, there's a set of images that are defined and have an ID. You could think about it as almost zero trust for container images.
Okay.
And as opposed to code signing, which I don't think it eliminates the need for code signing, but code signing is problematic just because, well, I got to actually get somebody to sign the code. And well, that's hit and miss all too often. And some people don't want their names attached to code for whatever reason. But, if code signing was the silver bullet, we'd have solved all these issues by now.
Very true. And I think there's also been some interesting conversations around WASM too. And
there's a nice article up on Cloud Native Now talking about the relation between WASM and AI. And WASM, it's still early days, but one of the attributes of WASM that's interesting is it allows you to really work with smaller bits of code. If the code is smaller, it's more efficient. And if it's more efficient, it uses things like GPU resources better. Now, GPU resources are expensive as all heck, and you can't find them anyway. So I guess what folks are making a case for here is that AI might wind up being a killer app for WASM because of the fact that it's just fundamentally more efficient. And there's a lot of other reasons to use WASM. It's still a little difficult to work with, but these days everybody's all about saving money. So I think folks will look into this a little more aggressively, and we'll see what happens. But cloud native and AI, eventually these things are going to come together, right?
Let's hope so, because it definitely seems like there's a lot of good synergies, as they say. Cool.
All right. And then, there's one other thing I would call everybody's attention to. It's up on the techstrong.tv website, but an interview with the folks at Scilabs. And we're talking about an alternative container format that they created. I think it was called Singularity back in the day. And it was designed for high performance computing environments, aka, things that run AI are a form of HPC, right? When you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
They're making a case for, look, they went out and they made this thing compatible with the container image standard format. So if I build an app in using Docker or whatever it is, I can take that image and run it on their container in a production environment. And why would you want to do that? Well, it turns out that their containers are a lot more efficient and are designed for high performance and are just easier to manage from an operational perspective. To all those folks on the DevOps side of that house, that's something that's interesting to them because, well, there's a lot of containers out there. They're getting bigger by the minute, and the original Docker, maybe not designed for that size of containers, and maybe we need another way of thinking about this in a production environment. But I think we're looking at more diversity among containers, and there's not going to be, back in the day, it was, if you said containers, it was synonymous with Docker, and maybe not so much anymore. So we'll see how all this plays out. But I think we're going to see some interesting times ahead. Docker's only the beginning of the story, not the end.
Yeah, indeed. I wonder how how that ties into our earlier discussion about security. Did in your conversation with Keith Cunningham, what was the security angle? Or was it mostly focused on the optimization piece?
It was mostly focused on the optimization piece, but I think we're going to have some significant security conversations on the back end. There's this whole thing called SecOps, right? Historically, this is how, and it's been an ongoing debate as to who's in charge of this. Is it the security people, or is that whole function moving over to the IT people? Because, well, there aren't enough security people, and security is core. So IT ops people should be running that. I think that melds into this whole DevSecOps conversation we're trying to have, where folks need to take more control of the environment anyway, and you might as well do that, optimize the environment and secure it at the same time. I just think that too much of what we've been trying to do is like, let's have 3 different teams meet at the quarterback and hope it all works out. I think, it's really just one function, and, next generation platforms maybe make it easier for mere mortals to master them all. But I think right now our issue is we got too many engineers stepping on each other's toes, and the tools are too complicated. So maybe it's time to get out of everybody's way.
Maybe it is.
So what's on your mind? What are you seeing out there that kind of leaps out at you in this cloud native space? I mean, talked about a bunch of things, but you see this content every day. What kind of issues are top of mind?
Well, I mean, definitely the AI conversation is huge, and using generative AI to help cut through a lot of the complexity as far as both development, deployment, and that's one reason why we bring up the WASM AI connection. And service mesh is still a very, very hot topic. Obviously, GitOps has been on people's minds this week, which is why I wanted to kick off with that conversation. And, security, especially, I mean, this week, seeing those major vulnerabilities all kind of cascading one after another, you cannot afford to ignore the security implications, really.
Here's what I think is going to be the most interesting thing about AI, at least this year, as it relates to containers and whatnot. So the average container runs for a couple of minutes, and the challenge is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these things coming and going on at all times. I don't think any human has any idea what containers are running, when and where, and what's actually happening in those systems. So you can imagine a time where somebody's using Gen AI to track all this stuff and then kick out a summarization of what happened when in these container environments that I could actually maybe show somebody for, I don't know, at auditing purposes or whatever. But I think, we're going to get more visibility and insights into these container environments, which today, are highly dynamic. And yeah, theoretically, we have all these observability tools, but I got to be a rocket scientist to implement the observability tools. I think we're looking at a great simplification coming, which might even democratize this stuff for the average mere mortal. And, who knows, we'll see what happens. But I'm kind of excited about the intersection of Gen AI and observability and containers, because I think that's some sort of primordial soup that'll lead to something even better.
No, and that's a great point. The trouble with applying observability in cloud native environments when there's so much data coming in from all the different microservices, and trying to dig down into that and figure out how that relates to a problem that you're seeing on the actual production side. So that's definitely a key area that AI is going to help for sure.
All right, folks. Well, that's what's on our mind this week.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and maybe you could write in a little bit and suggest some additional topics. But Sharon, take us home.
All right. That sounds great, folks. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you back here next week. Again, we are going to put all the links to the articles and things that we talked about in the show notes. And yeah, like Mike said, send us a note. Let us know what you want us to talk about. If you want to come on and talk to us, we would welcome that too. All right. Thank you. See you next week.